Hello, this is JP. So today we'd like to talk about Agentic AI. You heard a lot about Agentic AI, but today we're going to say a few words. And for me, Agentic would mean you have agents and the agents can share information between them, but do something more advanced that sharing information. That's an interesting idea. So I came across that article from Walmart, and it's an article about 3 years ago. Walmart started they deployed an algorithm, a negotiation algorithm, that basically interacts with they call them the tail end workers. Those are the people that move boxes around and cleaning and all that stuff. And the algorithm negotiates with those people, and Walmart brags and touts that they save between 1.5 to 3% of the payout, which is kind of very interesting. So that idea intrigued me. And what we did here is to develop an AI negotiator. That's very relevant for contracting everywhere, right? So just to make it very accessible and to be able to share the information, we decided to focus on something that everyone can relate to immediately, is the purchase of a house. So we developed a negotiator, AI negotiator, that can either buy or sell the house. So it is smart enough to understand the BATNA, the best alternative to no agreement, and smart enough as well to understand that a bid is more than just the price, but the other dimensions. So in the negotiation of the purchase of a house, for instance, it would be the time to remit the key. So the system understands the BATNA very well. And to make things more interesting, what we did as well is to give the AI negotiator different negotiation style, right? So for one of them, it's the bulldozer. So the bulldozer is kind of hard to work with and they make very few concessions. The second one is the diplomat. So the diplomat is more amenable to concessions and try to meet the other party halfway. And the other one that we have is the chameleon. And the chameleon is kind of the good cop, bad cop combined, but you don't know which is which. So it comes across a little like erratic. So we have the system, and one of the cool things about it, it can go in autoplay, meaning the buyer and the seller can play without intervention of a human being. And if the human being wants to be there, we can actually, we have room for the human being to come in and plug in and give the price and the time to remit the key and all that stuff. So how good of a negotiator is something that we take a look as well. So for example, if we are in what we call the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement, meaning that say the BATNA of the buyer would be 500 and the BATNA of the seller would be 450. It means there's a range of 450 to 500 when they can potentially agree with each other. So when you are in the ZOPA, the deal is in the ZOPA, how many times you close. So that would be the closing rate, right? If it's outside of the ZOPA, they cannot close, right? So that's a good metric to see how good the negotiation is going on. And other one that's interesting as well is what we call the surplus. So for example, with the same example, the buyer's ready to pay 500, the seller's ready to sell at 450. And the deal is that, say they have a deal at 490. So basically, the buyer was ready to pay 500 and paid 490, so has a surplus of 10. And by the same token, the seller has a surplus of 40. So we can look at the ratios of the buyer-seller surplus to be able to get an idea of the negotiation. And the third one that kind of makes a lot of sense as well is to look at the error in the estimate of the BATNA, right? So it's kind of interesting that if you're a buyer, you know your BATNA, but you don't know the BATNA of the seller, right? So you estimate the BATNA. And for the seller, it's the same thing. So the information is asymmetric. And to know the estimated BATNA is extremely helpful. So one of the things that we do is in this bidding is at the end, so both the buyer and the seller would expose their BATNA. So that basically creates room for learning. And so basically what we do is to use reinforcement learning to improve the behavior of the negotiator. So what we'll do now is take a look at a demo of the AI negotiator. So see you there. Cool. So what you can see here on the left, we have the seller, the little robot here, right? And then on the right, in the blue corner, right, you have the buyer, and we'll get the interaction between the buyer and the seller would appear in the middle. So let's start off with the initialization. So what this thing does here, we cannot random pick the price of the house from here. We put between 250 and $1 million, right? So you can pick any price. And then likewise, just to show that the bid is not unidimensional, not based only on price, it's normally multidimensional. And just to restate that fact, we use the time to remit the key once the purchase is done, and as a number of months. So it could be anything from immediately 0 months to remit the key to you in 1 year, right? So 12 months, whatever it is. And then you can see here we have the personality I was alluding to a little earlier. So the bulldozer is the one that's kind of a little mean kind of negotiator. They would make very little concessions, and then they may get angry very easily if things don't go well their way. And then you have the diplomat. The diplomat is kind of nicer, tries to make the deal happen, especially if the deal can happen, and is the kind of the nice person to interact with. And then the chameleon is the good cop, bad cop, but you never know when you're having interaction with the good cop or the bad cop. So we'll pick here, Bad, what do you want to pick? Let's say pick the diplomat. It could be different ones. You can have the bulldozer stuff, doesn't have to be the same one. And so that would basically set up the scenario for the negotiation. So we're saying like $500,000 and say maybe 7 months to remit the key, and we have a diplomat against a diplomat. So now we can start the negotiation, right? So start. So the negotiation starts with an opening bid, which is on the seller side. And the seller says, okay, I'm offering you a buyer $500,000 and remit the key to you in 7 months. And you can see on the seller side, there are two little boxes here, and the S BATNA is the BATNA of the seller. So that means that 403,000, and any price that would be lower than that, the seller would say, I'm walking away, right? And the seller needs to also know the BATNA of the buyer, but doesn't know. And so the seller estimates the BATNA. This is why we say BATNA would be in the mind of the seller. It's kind of a random number for now, which is 547,000. And if you look at over on the buyer, the actual number for the estimated BATNA is 515,000, right? So that's the actual one. And you can see there's kind of theory of mind here, in the sense that the seller has to estimate something. We as a user, we happen to know, but the seller doesn't know that. And the same thing happens on the buyer, right? So you have the BATNA, the buyer knows their BATNA very well, and then estimate the BATNA of the seller. So other kind of quick comment before we go any further, we go quick next. You see a chart, the two charts at the bottom here. And so it's on the horizontal axis, you have the number of months before remitting the key. And then on the vertical axis is the price. So when the price goes down, it falls, and price goes up, it goes up. And we also show the BATNA. So in the left chart, for example, this is the BATNA of the seller. And then the estimated BATNA, the seller is making of the buyer. And likewise, you can see on the other side, it's the symmetric. And you have the estimated BATNA at the bottom of the seller, and then the BATNA of the buyer on the top. Okay, and that little dot with it's tiny. There's a number 1 there, and it says that's the first bid. Okay, so let's see what the buyer has for us. And the buyer kind of, okay, I'm cooking. I'm looking at those numbers, and you can see, by the way, it says, I'll make a counter bid at 463,000, and we'll keep the month 7. That's okay with me. And you can see there's a little verbiage that goes in here. I appreciate the offer, but I wonder if we might, blah, blah, blah. So what we implemented in this AI negotiator is to make it a little more real, and the psychology of bids is that you have the verbiage. And what the verbiage does actually is 2 things. One is to say that my other buyer seller, my offer is really good, right? And I can have all kinds of languages. I can be very soft-spoken, I can be very harsh, and everything in between, right? So, and then the other piece on the verbiage is to tell you, please sweeten your bid. Either it's too high or too low, depending on who I am. And again, it can be very harsh language, or it can be very soft, right? So this is what the verbiage is there. And also the negotiator takes the verbiage to try to guess estimate the BATNA of the other guy. It uses the verbiage like a signal as well. Okay, let's look at what the seller does next. So the seller's thinking, and okay, the seller says this offer doesn't cut it for, and so we have a counter bid, right? So basically raises the price by 20 grand or something, and then cuts back a little bit. You can see it's month 6 now. You say, oh, okay, I want maybe 1 month. Kind of give me the key 1 month earlier, right? And let's look at the next one. So now it's the buyers. The buyers comes back and then makes a counter bid and keeps the month at 6, and now it's 474. Let's look at what happens next. And so depending on the negotiation style, that can go quite a while. So those guys are still kind of negotiating. And if you take a quick look at the graph is actually capturing the trajectory of the bid in that space of the months to remit the key and also the price. And it shows you visually, which I think is pretty cool, and how this thing is evolving. And in this case, which is pretty straightforward, all the bids are happening within the BATNA and estimated BATNA zone, meaning there's no bluffing. So from time to time, in kind of it happens that the bid may get outside of the estimated BATNA. This means that the negotiator kind of knows and believes the BATNA assumption, but then is trying to test the water, is kind of bluffing, so to speak. Okay. And here it ends with a deal, right? So here the buyer likes it and says, okay, we have a deal. So we just look at one bid between the buyer and the seller. So in autoplay, we can run several of these scenarios. So we'll show you right now how we can have a trail of, say, 1,000 scenarios. Wonderful. So that's the Excel spreadsheet that's generated from the negotiator that we saw. So, but maybe we can go through and explain a little bit what this Excel. So, how many records are there to start with? We have
1,000 simulations.
1,000. Cool. So the first one, if I understand correctly, is the negotiation ID. So that's basically ID of each negotiation, right? And the starting price, that's the buyers kind of starting the bid. And then we have immediately here the BATNA. And so it shows the BATNA, but we know that the buyer does not know the seller's BATNA and the seller doesn't know the buyer's BATNA, right? So this is how we've got these estimated one here. So for example, the first one, the buyer is 431.28, but the estimated BATNA from the seller's point is 412, right? And then symmetric for the seller. And then we have, oh, that's interesting, the buyer profile and the seller profile, as we're talking about the bulldozer diplomat. And then for the first one, and then we have the outcome if there was a deal or they couldn't reach a deal, right? And then we have the final price and the total rounds. So what's kind of interesting I can see here, but is the 27. If you go to column K, and then the row like 6, 7, there's the 27 rounds before they could have agreement there. So this one, we're looking at a bulldozer versus a bulldozer. Right, so the bulldozer, I think they make very few concessions or small concessions, right? That's why there's so many rounds. Let's go a little bit to the right here, and we can see the seller surplus. So that's the what the bid was compared with what the seller's BATNA is, right? And then the other one, same thing for the buyer and the actual bid. And then you have these. The bids, and it would go like number 1, number 2 if you go to the right, maybe and it would give the here our bid is very simple bid, right? It says what's the price and then the time to remit the key. Like for here, this one, the first row is like 427 and remit the key in 1 month, right? And then it keeps on moving like this, and then those numbers like column T and U, those I think is your system to capture the sentence, right? The actual verbiage that we encode with the type of message we want to deliver. And I think it goes on like this, right? Round 2, round 3, can you go to the right? And some of them would be kind of maybe relatively short, and some are very, very, can go to the right a little more. Some of them are really, really, really long, right? So this is it. And that's what we use in the reinforcement learning, right? Because we know what the BATNA is, what the estimated BATNA is, and we try to minimize the error on the BATNA, right? That's what we do here. Cool. This is excellent. Thank you very much. That's wonderful.
You're welcome.
So you may be wondering, are we getting in the real estate business or not right now? So the whole idea is to make very clear the fact that here we're looking at an agent that is able to negotiate. It turns out to be the purchase of the house, but it could be virtually anything. So if we look at, say, in terms of payer access, it could be what we negotiate with the likes of a United Health for this prior authorization, or the change in the status of the formula of the drug from maybe a tier 3 to a tier 2, or a quantity limited, or whatever it is. And you can think about all the possibilities that this open up. The fact that we're looking at the at this process of bidding where you have the BATNA of the buyer and the BATNA of the seller. Think of a multi-dimensional space where price is just one dimension of them. And then we have lines of, let me call it a bit like gravity, lines of equipotential, where the buyer would like to move around and the seller would like to move around. And we know that a very good negotiation would be one where, where one of the party would give up something that's not very valuable for that party, but very valuable for the other one. And this is where all the business of creativity in the negotiation comes from. So as you can see, this example just opens up, you can think of your own, of how we put together those contracts. And one more thing before I stop here is that when you look at contracts, we do have some kind of labeling of the dog and the cat, in the sense that we know which of those contracts work very well, just to look at the revenue, or which ones are giving us trouble, for example, lawsuits and issues, they invoke the SLA and people are not very happy. So we do have some kind of labeling of this thing that we can absolutely leverage as well. Okay, bye, see you next time.